Pepper. The same berry can taste sharp, smooth, or almost fresh depending on when it is picked and how it is processed. Black peppercorns are harvested unripe and dried, which creates that bold, biting heat you notice immediately. White pepper has the outer layer removed, so the flavor is more subtle, and it lingers longer. That is why you often see it used in sauces where you do not want visible specks. Green peppercorns are picked earlier and usually preserved, giving them a softer, almost fresh flavor that does not hit as aggressively. Bite into one, and it is less sharp, more rounded, and slightly herbal. Paprika is made from dried peppers, and the type of pepper and how it is processed completely changes the result. Sweet paprika is mild, and it mostly adds color with a gentle, slightly sweet flavor. Smoked paprika is dried over wood smoke, and that produces a deep, almost barbecue-like richness that can make a dish taste like it has been cooked for hours. Hot paprika is made from spicier peppers, so it adds noticeable heat on top of that base flavor. Hungarian paprika is often considered more complex, with a fuller, slightly sweeter profile depending on the variety. Smoked paprika can give a dish that slow-cooked depth, while sweet paprika stays in the background and simply rounds things out. Garlic powder. Made from dehydrated garlic that has been ground into a fine powder, so it disperses evenly and blends directly into a dish. Because it is dry, it behaves differently from fresh garlic. There is no sharp bite up front, just a more rounded, slightly toasted flavor once it hits heat. It shows up a lot in rubs and seasoning blends, where fresh garlic would burn or turn bitter. Garlic salt is simply the same powder mixed with salt. That sounds convenient, but it removes control because you are seasoning and salting at the same time. Onion powder. Made from dehydrated onions, ground into a fine powder that disappears completely into a dish. Unlike fresh onion, it doesn't bring texture or moisture, just a steady, savory base that spreads evenly throughout. It won't caramelize or develop that natural sweetness you get from fresh onion, so it doesn't really stand out on its own. It fills in the gaps instead of leading the flavor, which is why it shows up so often in seasoning blends and rubs. Onion salt is simply that same powder mixed with salt, which makes it convenient, but you lose control over how much seasoning you're actually adding. Cayenne pepper. The heat here comes from capsaicin, which spreads across your entire mouth almost instantly. That is different from black pepper, which contains piperine and tends to hit more in the back of your throat and nose. Because cayenne is ground so fine, there is nothing to slow it down. It does not build gradually, it just arrives all at once. That is why even a small pinch can shift the entire balance of a dish before you really notice it happening. Chili flakes. Made from dried chilies that are crushed rather than ground, so you get both the flesh and the seeds in uneven pieces. That is why the heat is not as uniform. You will hit a seed and get a sudden spike of heat, then nothing, then another hit. The seeds tend to carry a sharper, more lingering burn, while the flakes themselves bring more of the chili flavor. It is one of the few spices where texture directly changes how the heat shows up as you eat it. Cumin. These small seeds carry a warm, earthy flavor that deepens when they hit heat. Used whole, they stay slightly bitter and aromatic. Ground, they become fuller and more rounded. But the real shift happens when you toast them in oil. Cumin is fat-soluble, so its flavor opens up and spreads through the entire dish instead of sitting on top. Add it dry, and it can feel flat. Start it in oil, and it turns deep, rich, almost smoky. Nutmeg comes from a seed, but it is actually part of a fruit. That same fruit also gives you another spice, mace, the bright red outer layer wrapped around the seed. Same plant, two completely different flavors. Freshly grated nutmeg has a much stronger aroma than the pre-ground version, which fades quickly once exposed to air. In large amounts, nutmeg is mildly toxic, which is why you use only a small amount. It is one of the few spices where going slightly too far changes the dish immediately. Turmeric is known for its bright yellow color. The flavor itself is surprisingly mild and slightly bitter when tasted on its own. It rarely stands out in a dish. Instead, it blends in and adds depth once it is cooked. In many cases, it is used more for the color than the taste. A small amount can turn an entire dish golden without changing the flavor very much. Cinnamon comes from the inner bark of a tree, which is why it behaves so differently from most spices. In stick form, it releases flavor slowly into liquids and ground. It hits much faster and more evenly. There are also two main types, Ceylon and Cassia. Cassia is stronger and more common, while Ceylon is softer and slightly more delicate. In savory dishes, cinnamon leans warm and woody, not sweet, and that is why the same spice can feel completely different depending on how it is used. Bay leaves, these are almost never eaten on their own. They are added whole and left to sit in a dish while it cooks. At first they do not seem to do much, but over time they release a subtle, slightly bitter, almost tea-like flavor that blends into the background. It is a slow process, so you do not really notice it happening. But leave them out and the dish feels flatter, like something is missing, even if you cannot quite name it. Cardamom. If you have ever had a chai latte and noticed that sweet, slightly floral note you could not quite place, that is cardamom. It comes in small pods that hold tiny black seeds, and that is where most of the flavor sits. Crack a pod and the aroma and oils release quickly. Leave the pod whole, and the flavor seeps out slowly. The flavor is hard to pin down. Slightly sweet, a bit citrusy, with an almost minty edge. Once it is in a dish, it does not blend in quietly. Cloves. These are actually dried flower buds, which is why they are so dense and intense for their size. The flavor is warm and slightly sweet, but also sharp and almost numbing if you use too much. Most recipes only call for 1 or 2 because they do not just blend in, they stand out immediately. Used whole, they release slowly. Ground, they hit fast, and once they are in, they are hard to ignore. Saffron. These thin red threads come from the stigma of a crocus flower, and each flower only produces 3 threads. They are picked by hand, and it takes thousands of flowers to make a small amount, which is why saffron is one of the most expensive spices in the world. On its own, the flavor is subtle, but once it is steeped in warm liquid, it releases a deep, golden color and a slightly earthy, almost honey-like aroma that spreads through the entire dish. Sichuan peppercorns are not actually a pepper. They are the husk of a berry from a citrus-related plant, which is why the effect feels so different. Instead of heat, they create a tingling, almost numbing sensation on your lips and tongue. They are often used alongside chili peppers, so you get both the burn and that buzzing feeling at the same time. MSG, short for monosodium glutamate, is not really a spice in the traditional sense. It is a pure form of umami, the savory taste. It does not add a new flavor on its own, it amplifies what is already there. That is why foods taste richer, fuller, and more satisfying with it, even if you cannot point to a specific change. It is naturally present in tomatoes, cheese, and mushrooms, but in this form it is concentrated. Most of the controversy comes from outdated claims, but chemically it is the same thing your body already processes every day, only in a higher concentration. Thanks for watching. Let us know what we should cover next. And if you enjoy clear, fast breakdowns like this, subscribe for more.